running through the life of Jacob, and as we've seen, I'm trying to figure out why I can't find my place in the book of Acts, and as we've seen with Jacob's life, God has orchestrated where he goes, what he does, and how he does things in a desire to see his life changed and to see him change from his carnal nature into what we would call a more spiritual man, a more spiritual person. And the bottom or the source of that comes from a promise that is contained in the Bible for each one of us, where God says to us that it is him that has started a good work in us, and he will bring it to completion. And it is God who has preordained us. He's looked at us from before we were even conceived and thought of, and selected us and taken us, and that as time goes on, he will then work with us, bring us to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, and then he'll work with us some more, and he'll sanctify us until such time as the day comes when we are no longer here but standing in his presence, and at that time we'll be perfect. So that's the life of Jacob, and we see with this walk of Jacob. Last time we were together in Genesis, we were in Genesis chapter 33, and we saw with Jacob that he had that encounter with God, and his life is radically changed, even to the point of being physically changed, where his hip is now out of joint, and he walks on a stick. He's kind of like hobbled, and now he's coming to meet with Esau, his older brother, who he wronged for the first time. And Esau has promised a long time ago that he is going to kill Jacob, and we see something totally different in Jacob's life. And it says here in chapter 33, verse 2, it says that Jacob here, he's making a bit of a plan again. He's scheming, conniving, and it says here, and he put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. Now verse 3, then he crossed over before them. Jacob would never have done that. So taking that verse today and expounding upon this change and how God works in our lives. Here in Texas, we say that everything is bigger here in Texas. That's something that the state of Texas prides itself on. In Africa, we used to have a little saying that it's tough to live in Africa, and indeed it is. If you look at Africa, say compared to here in Texas, I mean, here you have probably about 3 snakes that'll kill you, 3 different types of snakes, I believe, somewhere around there. In Africa, I used to keep snakes for many years. I don't even know how many snakes we got there, okay? And of those, you've got at least 3 that'll kill you within a couple of seconds, and then you've got another 3 after that, and another 3 after that. It's amazing how many poisonous snakes we have over there. I mean, there are multitudes of poisonous snakes over there. And I was showing Shell a picture of these guys that were wrestling a snake out of a tree, and the snake must be probably about that in diameter, and the tree is easy 20 foot up, and I mean the snake is from the ground, it goes up and it's on top of the tree like this. And then there's another thing of a guy in a golf cart, and he's bailing out of the golf cart, and they come and they open up the seat, and they start pulling out this green mamba. Now green mamba is deadly poisonous, and I mean they are just pulling this thing out, and I mean he's coming out in lengths, it's just massive, and he's in underneath the golf cart seat. But it is tough to live in Africa. And one of the stories that comes out of there is, if you watch a giraffe being born, giraffes are an amazing animal, they really are. And if ever you get the opportunity to be around a giraffe, I was fortunate enough one day to be around a big male giraffe, and I had some feed in my hands. And you stand and you look up at this thing, and I mean, he is massive. And when he bends down, when he starts bending down to come to you, it's like he's coming down and down, and only when you're underneath him do you realize how big he actually is. And as he gets closer, that head seems to grow. You know, his head's massive. He's a massive animal. I mean, you look at pictures and you see those little thin legs and those little knobbly knees. No, those knobbly knees are like this, okay? Those legs are massive legs. So the giraffe comes down, and one thing, when he eats, he's such a big animal, but when he eats out of your hand, it's like you can barely feel it. All you can feel are the little hairs on his lip touching, and each one of those lips, I mean, those lips are like that around my hand. I mean, they're big old suckers around there, you know, and he just gently takes off like this. But when the giraffe gives birth, on average, when mama giraffe gives birth, she gives birth standing up. And on average, that's about 10 foot off the ground. Yesterday, I was busy working on our house and my scaffolding was up, and you're off the ground 10 foot and you're looking down and you're thinking, that is going to hurt. If I fall, that is going to really hurt. And here, mama giraffe gives birth. That little baby, we mind about the doctor slapping us. That little baby drops 10 foot and he hits the ground. Okay? Then, he's kind of like stumbling around to get up, and mom brings that head down a little bit, and as he's kind of sort of getting up, she'll nudge him, and it's cute, but she'll nudge him and he falls over, and it's sweet, and mom, give him a break, he hasn't got his legs yet, you know, and she keeps on nudging him, and he falls, and he falls, and he falls, and he falls, and then when he finally starts getting it, they're kind of like, I don't know, I think it's like me doing the Texas two-step, I just can't dance, but he's just like kind of all over the place. Then what she does, she'll bring that big old leg up and she kicks him. Okay? And she doesn't kick him softly. She kicks him that he takes a dive. And he'll kind of like ouch and up, and she'll go over to him again. She'll kick him again and keeps on kicking him. And you sit back and you watch this and you're like, wow, that's kind of like my mom. But what's the point of all of this? And you've got to realize that it's not just being vindictive. There's a reason behind this. Animal that's just being born is covered in blood. Out in Africa, everything eats everything, okay? Well, blood, the scent of blood, you and I can smell blood. You'll smell blood a ways off. So can you imagine how strong that scent is for an animal? So what happens is mama giraffe knows that she's got to get that guy up and moving fast, so that he can get away from where all that blood and water was initially dropped, and then also be able to run. Because the lions and the hyenas and the wild dogs and things, they don't typically go for the full-grown giraffe, they take out the babies. So that what we would perceive as cruel, inhumane, nature's so cruel, as I said, no. The beauty of it is she's looking after that little one. And against her motherly instincts of being soft and nurturing and everything else, she's doing something that actually hurts her in order to protect and ensure the safety of the little one. How much more with God and you and I? You kind of just got to think and wonder to yourself, man, how many times has God really got to just correct me to bring me to the point of understanding? And how does that hurt God? We've spoken before about the shepherd having that short stick, the rod and the staff, and breaking the little lamb's leg, carrying the little lamb, so that there's a bond that's developed between the two. So here too with Jacob, we saw Jacob in his life and his walk kind of going back to the same thing over and over again. And the same thing that was a trademark or an earmark to his life was he would do something deceptive and then he'd run. So God does what? God takes the hip, displaces it, causes that sinew to shrivel up in that hip, so the hip will never ever go back as it used to be. So he's now hobbled and he's got to walk on a cane. He's unable to run anymore. It tells us there that Jesus was the one that was wrestling with him and that he did it. How must it have hurt the heart of God to actually physically hurt man? So turn with me quickly to Psalms 26. Book of Psalms, middle of your Bible, and then just go, I beg your pardon, Proverbs 26. Go to the middle of your Bible and then just go right a little bit, you'll find the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 26, a verse that I kind of refer to a lot. Proverbs 26 verse 11, it says, as a dog returns to his own vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. Majority of us have had dogs. I mean, dogs do just, a lot of nasty things. But one of the nasty things that they will do is they'll go and eat something that just affects their gut badly, throw up, and then they're going to eat it again. In fact, a dog will eat something that is poisonous to it, and your body's natural reaction is to kick it out, and he'll throw it up, and he'll go back and then eat the same poison. That's got to start putting into your head a little picture of how does this pertain to you and to me? And what is the poison that I keep on going back to? It's Shell's got this little Shih Tzu. It's funny, we've got a lab cross-border collie, big old guy, and we've got this little Shih Tzu, 18 pounds. And when the chicken flies in the yard, the lab, because he's been disciplined, the lab runs and hides. The Shih Tzu, he's blind as a bat. He goes after the chicken, will catch the chicken, kill the chicken, and then eat the chicken. We came home a little while ago. There was Fabio. His name's Fabio. He's a whole official name because he's got pedigree. It's like you cannot believe it. What's his pedigree name?
Little Prince Fabio.
Little Prince Fabio, and there's something else I know as well. But anyway, Prince Fabio had caught a chicken and proceeded to eat the chicken. And we got back, and he's black and white. The whole front of him now is just red and covered in gore. It was a sight to behold. Shell was mad. Oh, you're disgusting. And then she was going off at Fabio. But Fabio, after doing that, for days, he's sick. And yet, I'll go into the yard, I'll find the chicken, right? And then the next minute, there's a wing. He'll stash parts of this chicken and keep on going back to it. And every time he goes back to it, he can't eat because he's so violently ill. But he'll go back to it. How about you and me? Last week we did something, and that was, for those of you that weren't here, I handed out a lot of pennies, and I challenged everybody. If you are negative, or you have negative thoughts, take that penny and go and drop it into a little Ziploc bag. Next Wednesday night when we come in, I'm going to ask you to bring those Ziploc bags in. I'm not going to humiliate you. That's definitely not what I'm going to do. I'm not going to draw attention to it. This is between you and God. It's got nothing to do with me or anybody else here. But I challenge you to do it. And I mean, in light of today's world that we live in, it's not such a bizarre challenge. I mean, we could do the Tide Pod challenge. Yeah. And just eating Tide Pods, that says a lot for society. This new Kiki challenge, I don't know if you've seen that one. Kiki challenge, there's a song, it says something about I love you Kiki or whatever, but anyway, there's this whole little song. And the challenge is that while your vehicle is moving, the person that's driving the vehicle, they film it. You get out of the passenger door, the door's open, they're filming you as they're driving along, and you dancing, doing this little dance that goes to this Kiki song. And for me, I love these things on YouTube, because what I do is as soon as I find one, I fast forward to the end. If they're lying on the dirt or crying, and then I go back and I watch it, and I watch them wipe out. And so honestly, some people have fallen and gone underneath the car. They get run over by their own vehicles.
Because they're supposed to try to get back in the car after that.
And I mean, there was one where an oncoming car ran them over. And I was like, you idiot, you deserve that. That's nature's way. I mean, this is Africa.
That car was set up, though. He was supposed to jump on top of it with his dance.
Okay, that's even dumber. Then you want to jump on top of a moving car. And I can say that because I've done stupid things like that. Not the Kiki challenge, but here's the thing. Take this challenge. And the challenge is not to show you or drag you down or anything. But like with Jacob, okay? When Jacob was first with mom, and mom said, hey, go and do this and we'll deceive dad. Jacob turned around and he said, if I do this, I will seem as a deceiver to my father. Not I am going to be a deceiver. I will seem as a deceiver. Okay, that's his first inclination of where his mind's at. I'm not really a sinner, but I'll do it, even though it's a sin, and then I'll seem as a sinner. That's in essence what he's saying. The next step then is when Jacob's dad questions him, and he says to him, hey Jacob, or he says to him, my son, who are you? His answer is, I am Esau. Well, as we broke that name Esau down, and you take it back to its prime roots, the word what it comes to, and you'll see there, it describes man. Well, man, if you break that down further, is a sinner, a conniver. Everything that's basically despicable, that's what that word breaks down to. Okay, that's who we are. So in essence, he's saying, okay, so I'm man. I'm sin. I'm the embodiment of sin. But he doesn't break it down and get specific as to what sin. Then later on, when he wrestles with God or Jesus, he says to him, who are you? And at that point, he breaks it down. He says, I am Yaakov. I'm Jacob. I am deceitful. I'm the deceitful one. I'm the tricky one. So it's a specific sin. And so too with those pennies. It's not to point out, hey, look how bad you are. You 50 pennies worth of sin or 100 pennies worth of sin. Wow. Like I said earlier, my pennies are all blown in an instant. And it's not to show you that. It's for you to be able to identify one of the issues in your life so you can go before God and saying, okay, look, here's the hard proof in my hand. This is who I am. This is what my nature is. This is something that I don't want to be. And now you've identified it. Now you can say, okay, here, Lord, please take it. Because until you identify it, how can you really and truly give it to God? Until such time as you identify the struggle that you are struggling against, be it drugs, alcohol, whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is. And just because it is a sin for one person doesn't mean that it's a sin for you, i.e. alcohol. Alcohol is not, the Bible doesn't say it's a sin. In fact, it says, here's who can drink. In the church, here's who can drink. There's a prohibition for a pastor to drink. There's a prohibition against a king or a ruler drinking. But it's not a sin for everybody. But if God speaks to your heart and says to you, hey, I don't want you to do that anymore, and that's something that the Holy Spirit speaks to you, that is between you and Him, and that's very specific. I don't care if it's permitted or not permitted in the Word, okay? So too with anything in life. If God convicts you of, say, Facebook, too much time on your phone on Facebook. Wow, I don't see Facebook mentioned in the Bible. It can't be a sin. Well, if God's speaking to you, that's between you and Him. You need to listen up, okay? So that's the idea behind the pennies. So now we go to this little verse here, as a dog returns to his own vomit. The dog here, not knowing any better, keeps on going back to, he'll go back to even what is harmful for him, even what is poison to him, he'll go back to. Jump over to 2 Peter, and I want to explore this a little further with regards to this dog analogy. Where am I? James. Okay, 2 Peter. And it's going to be in chapter 2. 2 Peter 2. I'm going to pick it up in verse 18. Okay, 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 18. It says here, for when they speak great swelling words of emptiness, they allure through the lusts of the flesh, through lewdness, the ones who have actually escaped from those who live in error. This is referring now to preachers. Okay, so when a preacher comes along and he uses like big fancy words and fancy sermon, and he's pulling you in, verse 19, while they promise them liberty, they themselves are slaves of corruption. For by whom a person is overcome, by him also he is brought into bondage. So now he's saying, okay, so these fancy words, this little sermon, is pulling you into bondage. Verse 20. Peter here in this one is obviously referring to the Jewish people and pulling you back into the law. But I want you to take it out of that context and put it into today's context with us, okay? certain evangelistic type preachers pulling you into their way of thinking. Now take it a step further. Take it out of that. Take it back to, say, the preacher of Facebook. And I'm hitting on Facebook because that's something that I know has been a problem for me. Take it on Facebook. TV. Just too much TV time. Whatever it is that pulls you in and sucks you in, okay? It lures you in and pulls you. Okay? So here he's saying in verse 20, for if after they've escaped the pollutions of the world through the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are again entangled in them and overcome, the latter end is worse for them than the beginning. So once you've escaped the sinful nature, once you've come to a knowledge of Jesus Christ and you've escaped that, when you are sucked back in and you entangled again, Peter's saying here, it's even worse for them the second time around. Okay. Then at the end, or then going on in verse 21, he says, for it would have been better for them not to have known the way, as we spoke the first service, the way, referring to early Christianity, the way of righteousness, than having known it, to turn from the holy commandment delivered to them. But it has happened to them according to a true proverb, a dog returns to its own vomit. Now what he's saying is, the person that finds freedom from sin, finds that he can overcome sin and is not enslaved to it, finds that he has a relationship with God, and then turns from that relationship. Peter's saying it's worse for him than for somebody never ever to have known. So again, I'll call into question, once saved, always saved? Not according to Peter. Because Peter's clearly pointing out that there are saved that will turn away and go back to their own vomit. That's a proverb he quotes. So now, this dog that returns to his own vomit, who's the dog? You've got to start asking yourself that question. Now I'm starting to sort of tread where angels fear to tread, and maybe I shouldn't, but what the heck, let's go for it. Matthew 15. One thing I love, these pages are so thin, and I battle because my hands are calloused and that, and I've got fat fingers. I battle to flip through the pages, but I love listening to the pages. When I used to travel, one of my favorite spots in the world is southern France, Nice, and the beaches there are all pebbles. And when the surf, they hadn't got waves and that, like I was going to say like here in California, but California also doesn't have real waves. But it's just like a little bit of a surge, and it kind of washes up and washes back, and as that water runs over those pebbles, it makes a very similar sound to all this that I'm hearing when you turn the pages. I love it. So, getting back now to these to this dog story in Matthew chapter 15, verse 21. Bizarre little story here. So, Jesus and the disciples, they've gone to this area called Tyre. And they're going there because Jesus, if you look at what's going on, he keeps on going from one place to another. The crowds find out about it, and they keep on swamping him and coming there. So they're exhausted. Not Jesus, the disciples, okay? So they retreat to this region of Tyre and Sidon. Verse 22. And behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region and cried out to him, saying, have mercy on me, O Lord, son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. But he answered her not a word, didn't speak to her. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, send her away, for she cries out after us. Verse 24, but he answered and he said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Verse 25, then she came and she worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and he said, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Here's this dogs again, okay? So in this little vignette here, what's happening, as I said, Jesus and the disciples, they retreat. The next minute, this woman shows up, and if you go and have a look in the book of Mark, chapter 7, it recounts the same story, but it's from a different angle, so there's different facts that are given. And from that account, you can see that this lady, she's of Greek descent. She's a Syro-Phoenician woman. And she comes up and she starts shouting. Now, these guys are inside, she's outside. And she's addressing Jesus from outside. And she's shouting then, "Oh, son of David." So she's declaring, "I know who you are. Come out, kind of thing." The disciples, obviously getting weary of this, turn around to Jesus and say, "Oh, come on, Lord, just give her what she wants and send her on her way. Get rid of her." Jesus now, the first time she calls out, he doesn't answer. Why not? Oftentimes, no answer is an answer within itself. Oftentimes, when you say to God, "Oh Lord, please, give me direction," and there's nothing, that may be an answer in and of itself. So here he keeps quiet. The next thing that happens is it prompts the disciples to then get into the mix. It's not now just between this woman and Jesus. Now the disciples are involved, and the disciples are saying to Jesus, "Hey, just get rid of her. Give her what she wants." But she's a Syro-Phoenician woman. She's of Greek descent. She is not a Jew. The law? Well, Jesus wasn't to mix with them. He's a Jew. He wasn't supposed to have anything to do with the Jews. But at the same time, the same law in Exodus, Deuteronomy, and Leviticus all command the Jewish people to show kindness to a non-Jew. So it's funny how they want to look at one thing and not the other. The whole idea with giving the Jewish people the law and having God rule over them was that other nations would see how blessed these people are and want the same thing from the Jewish people. Yet that didn't happen. Why? Because the Jews hoarded the law, hoarded God's word, and turned around and said, "Oh, we're better than you." No different to what the church does today. "Oh, we Christians, we're better than you." No, we're not. We've simply been given something called grace. We didn't deserve it, didn't do anything to get it, definitely didn't earn it, yet we've been given it. And now all of a sudden that makes us better than the person that's not in church? Not so. So at this point, Jesus challenges his disciples and he says, "But hold on a second, the law says that I shouldn't have anything to do with this woman. The law says that I've come to Israel, the house of Israel, the Jews." And then they don't have an answer for that. But she speaks up, okay? So she speaks up and asks again, and at this time, Jesus says to her, verse 26, "It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." Notice the little dogs, that's important. Two types of dog in those days. Big dogs and little dogs. I think it's true in life today. It's big dogs and little dogs. And these little dogs are what we would consider pets. Okay? In many places, especially in third world countries, pet dogs that have been left and chucked out and abandoned, they will form packs and they'll go back to what dogs do. Dogs are a wild animal that we've domesticated. So here this woman is saying, Jesus is saying it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. In other words, this table that is set, the Jewish people are sitting at this table, but the little dogs that are hanging around on the floor, they get to eat the morsels that are thrown off this table and are dropped. They get to feed on the same spiritual food. That's what's being said. So the little dogs are not Jews, but the little dogs now are referring to somebody that's at least in the house, if you want to say in the house of the Lord, sitting underneath the table and are being fed the same spiritual food. So they're not a total outcast and a Gentile. So just as Jesus' ministry, he came and he spoke to the Jews, but then he reached out to the Gentiles. And through Christ, the door was opened for the Gentiles to come in, right? Those are the Gentiles that are sitting under that table. Those are the little dogs. This is different to the dog that's going back to its own vomit. So what is the big dog? So, and just to go back on that, so she's one of these little dogs, and that's what she's pointing out. She says to him, "Yes, Lord, but even the little dogs, me, I'm a little dog because I'm not a Jew. I'm one of these Gentiles, okay? But even the little dogs eat the crumbs that fall off the master's table." You are the master, I am a Gentile, but yes, I'll still survive on those crumbs that fall off, okay? And that's what the Jews were referring to Gentiles as, dogs. But now there's this next class of dogs, the big dog. That's where I want to go to this morning quickly. So jump with me to 1 Kings chapter 21. First Kings chapter 21, and I'm just going to start reading while you get there. Now, this passage, give you the backdrop to it. The king Ahab, okay? Ahab wanted a certain vineyard, and Naboth, he owned it. Wasn't wealthy, just had this one insignificant little vineyard, but Ahab wanted that and everything else around it. So he goes over to him and says to him, sell me your vineyard. He says to him, no, I won't. It's my family's vineyard. It's been in my family for all these years. I'm keeping it. So he gets upset about it. He goes home and he complains to his wife. His wife hatches a plan. This is Jezebel. She hatches a plan, and what she does is she sets up Naboth and has false witnesses come against him, and they end up putting him to death. The moment he dies, she turns to hubby now and says, hey, he's dead. Go and take the vineyard that you wanted. Coincidence, he just died. So he goes, grabs the vineyard, and then from that, God uses a prophet to go and prophesy to him, and he says to him in chapter 21, verse 19, God says to the prophet, you shall speak to him, saying, thus says the Lord, have you murdered and also taken possession? And you shall speak to him, saying, thus says the Lord, in the place where the dogs lick the blood of Naboth, dogs shall lick your blood. Then jump down again further to verse 23, and now he's talking about Jezebel, okay? The prophet's going to prophesy concerning Jezebel. And concerning Jezebel, the Lord also spoke, saying, the dogs shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. The dog shall eat whoever belongs to Ahab and dies in the city, and the birds of the air shall eat whoever dies in the field. So now you've got these other dogs, and this is foreign to us because, like, I know Shane and Daisy, they've got some big old dogs running around their house. There's a difference here. The big dogs are these dogs that are literally roaming around in the cities, and they had a problem with them, and the dogs typically lived in the outskirts of the cities where the dumps were, and they'd eat whatever was in the dump. They'd also eat whatever carcasses and things were lying around. And just as these prophecies speak, this literally is what happened, and these dogs literally did eat Jezebel as she was tossed out and smattered on the base of the wall. The dogs did come and eat it. So now I say to you, go back to that first little scripture that we looked at. A dog always returns to its own vomit. Who is the dog? That's the question. The dog is not a foolish person. Some of the Bible expositors or commentaries will say that it's a reference to a foolish person, because King Solomon in that proverb is relating a lot of foolish wisdom as to wise, and that's what those proverbs are about. But he moves away from that as well. I'd suggest to you, based upon scripture, interpreting scripture, that dog there is a total unbeliever. Somebody who has just got no interest, somebody who does not come to know the Lord at all, and also the person who comes to know God and then walks away. Just like Peter was warning about, saying, hey, that person who comes to know the peace of God, comes to know Christ, he actually says there, Jesus Christ, comes to know that and then walks away, Peter would say to him, that person going back is like a dog going back to his own vomit, like little Fabio going back to eat pieces of the chicken and then suffering for days and not being able to eat and everything else. You watch people, even here in our community, that come to know the Lord, and then they go back to their own vomit and they live in absolute misery. And it breaks my heart. I've said, there's one specific guy, and I can go back to him time and time again, and I can go back to him and I can, man, think about what you had. Don't you want that? Yes, I do. Don't you want that peace that you spoke about? Yes, I do. Then why? I just can't. And I said to this guy, look, how about I can get you access to a whole year's program of rehab? Will you take it? He turned around and he said, you know what, I've come clean once before. And if somebody really wants to, they can. Those programs don't work. Are you listening to what's coming out of your mouth? You've just said to me, if you really want to, and you have before, and you want what you had, so why are you still stuck in it? Going back to his own vomit. He's going back to eat another chicken leg. And it's crazy. It's like this winner chicken dinner kind of thing. What have you won? What is the allure to this? Just like Peter was saying, when you're lured in, what is it that's drawing you in? And for you and me on the outside, you're kind of looking in and you're thinking, there's so much that says don't do it. I don't understand why you would go and do it. But until you've been in that person's shoes, until you've walked in those shoes, until you've experienced the hold that drugs has on you, you can't turn around and say, man, the guy's an idiot. You can't do that because you don't know what the pull is. You don't know what the hold is. We took something very simple, like just a bad attitude or a negative word. And I guarantee you, all of us that are taking the challenge were seriously thinking about that. For me personally, it was in the back of my mind all the time. Not that I was thinking, oh, no, I better not lose a penny, Because I was being very strict with myself, thinking, if I even think a negative thing, I'm going to grab that penny. And if that's on my mind, that simple little challenge about just negativity, how much more is it on the mind of somebody that's enslaved to something? Chemical addiction, or enslaved to anger. So that, I would hope, would elicit compassion out of us. But more than that, have a look at just that one penny at a time. And that one penny by itself, man, it's a penny. What can you buy for a penny today realistically? When I was little, I could buy two little things of gum for a penny back in South Africa. But now, what can you buy with a penny? I was in Europe one year and I was traveling from Italy to Greece, and as we were leaving, we were in the harbor and I was about to get onto this ship. I picked up a note, and if I remember correctly, I think it was 10,000 lira, if I remember correctly. All I know, it had a lot of dollars, and I was backpacking, and the first thing in my mind was, man, when I come back, I'm going to go and have me a huge meal. And I was living on nothing, food. And went over to Greece. I had the most amazing time over there. Came back, and true to my word, I got back, and the first thing I did is I pulled that note out of my bag and I went over. I ended up getting myself a slice of pizza. That's what the lira was worth. It was worth nothing. I mean, there's this beautiful note, and I think it was 10,000. It got me a slice of pizza. The change that I got off that, I literally threw it away. The change cannot buy you anything. And in order to use change, in order to buy something, you're going to have to collect so much of it that you walk around there and the streets are covered, well, were back then before the euro, were covered with change, coins. They're just lying around because there's no worth in it. But there were 50 pennies in one of those rolls. I know my entire roll ended up in my job. A couple of us as well, our entire roll ended up in the jar. The point is, how quickly do those pennies add up? What I'm getting at is, just like Jacob, at one point, he had to fess up and he had to get very specific with God. And it was a progression. And we saw that in the beginning, oh, I'll just seem like it. Then it was a generalization, oh yeah, Lord, I'm a sinner. Then it was, this is who I am, very specific. These are the problems I deal with. And then he could talk to God one-on-one. In First Peter, it's not Peter, it is James. Book of James, chapter 1. Verse 22. Now, James, you've got to think about who he is or who he was. Half-brother of Jesus, having had the opportunity to live with Jesus for 30 years or thereabouts, and yet deny him and walk away from it. Afterwards, when he does become a believer, after the crucifixion, the zeal that is within James, and you can see it in his writings, he doesn't mess around anymore after that. Man, I had something so precious for so many years, and I didn't know what I had, and I walked away from it. Now in the book of James here, chapter 1, verse 22, he says to us, "But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves." In other words, if you're sitting in church and you hear a word and you don't do it, well, you just deceived yourself. How about when God speaks to you and you hear it and you've got a conviction of it, like I'm going to change something in my life, and then you don't do it? Verse 23, he says, "For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man observing his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of man he was." It's kind of like the dog again and the vomit. My guts are sore. I'm hurting from the mess that I ate. I've got temporary relief because I've just thrown up. For me, oily foods are a problem. And sometimes I'll eat oily foods and I'll get home, and Shell told me that when years ago you could get some sort of product here. What was that product? Not to be confused with the prophet Habakkuk, but Abikak. And apparently you could take this stuff and it would make you throw up immediately and you'd get relief. And then many times I'd eat an oily meal and I'm just like, oh, I just want to get rid of it. And yet the Bible's telling us that you have this temporary relief and then you go back and you consume the same thing again, okay? So James is warning us about that, and he says, okay, so don't be this fool that has a look in the mirror. God, don't be the man that goes before God. God tells you something, and then you recognize that this is what you're dealing with, who you are, and then you forget about it. Verse 25, "But he who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it." The law of liberty? This is the law of liberty right here. This is not a book full of do's and don'ts. This is a book for me of what I get to do and what I don't have to do anymore. So this is the law of liberty, and is not a forgetful hearer but a doer of the work. This one will be blessed in what he does. What is the work that God is setting before you today? What is the conviction that God has brought to you over and over again through different churches, different messages, different songs on the radio, and you're really convicted of it, and then you don't do anything about it? James here is telling you that conviction, it's not just oh, that's great, yeah, let me do this, it's done. He's telling you it's a work. It's going to take work. And just like this negativeness, and I'm hopping on the negativeness because that's the one we chose. That's our Kiki challenge for the church, our Tide Pod challenge. Okay? Because this is something that I really battled with personally. I've told you before, I've got PTSD. I'm clinically diagnosed with it. I do have a tendency to be very negative. I do have and I'm very skeptical, especially of people. So I do have a tendency to analyze and judge people. So therefore, oh, see, he's doing that. I told you he was that. That's negativity. And yet, God did something in my life not too long ago, and I see this change, and it's, where did this come from? This is just weird. And I can tell you this much, if you can do it with somebody who is as stubborn and hard-headed as me and Jacob, there's no reason why he can't do it with you. Regardless of what the doctor has said, what he's diagnosed you with, or what he hasn't said. I was talking to Masandra the other day, and one of the questions were, are you on medication for that? No, I'm not. And Shell will tell you, about 2 years ago, a change happened, and it's amazing the change that has happened. It's unbelievable. And I was rejoicing the other day, having gone those 2 days without being negative at all. I was like, man, this is amazing. And I'll confess here, I still thought to myself, you know what? Oh, it is. I confessed it. Now I'm going to shame the devil now, but I thought to myself, you know what? When it comes time to put the pennies in the jar, I'm going to put some in anyway, just so that I can relate. My whole roll went the very next day. Honestly, my whole roll and more. I might as well put, mine should have been a roll of quarters. Because I woke up the next day, and I honestly was just getting slammed. There was no reason for it. I woke up in a very, very, very bad place that morning. And I was struggling, really struggling. And I was with Shell, and we were busy building on the house. First time I've had a full day to build on the house for months and months now. I've been begging for time. I get my time, I wake up in a bad mood. And I haven't been like that for a long time. Yeah, Shell's nodding, so it must be true. So I haven't been like that for ages. And then on that day, I wake up like that, and I was just negative. I was out of pennies very quickly. So this thing that James is talking about here, and he says, but be a doer of the work. It's not an easy thing. It is going to require work. It is going to require that you take time out, sit in front of God, and just acknowledge who you are. I'm hoping, and why the pennies, is I'm hoping to bring a realization to each and every one as to who you are. And I'm not saying you're a bunch of negative people you have to change. Okay? The next thing that I'd like to do, I've got a brother who's out in San Antonio and does some ministry work out there. And one of the things that their churches do is they feed the homeless. And when I'm saying homeless, I'm not referring to like our commodities line here, where the guys pull up in SUVs and nice cars and everything. I'm talking about guys that wake up in the morning in the gutter and literally pull the syringe out their arm and then go and stand in that line to get fed. This lady, she's from Africa, and from what I've read and from what I can see, she's on a mission, man, and God has put her there. The church that she has is in a downtown area, and I haven't seen it, but I've seen pictures of it. There's a wall on the sidewalk, dedicating what that lot is, and there's a doorway into this lot. But the building inside the lot fell down many years ago, so it's just an abandoned lot that's kind of sort of been cleaned up. That's their church. There's no roof over it. That's their church. And their church, they feed the homeless. These guys that have got nothing feed people that have got nothing, if that's another word. Sorry, Jack. But I would like to take this church. I'd like to take this church down there, because they do it on a Saturday, down there to go and help feed that church. And why I want to do that is because when we drive down there, having got up out of bed, having walked out of our front door, that means we've got a roof on our head, got into our vehicle and driven down here, and then been able to drive all the way down there with a full belly, taking food and giving it to these people who have just woken up in a gutter, who have nothing, had no yesterday, have no hope for tomorrow. I would like us to be able to do that so that we can see, man, I think I've got it hard, but I am living like a prince compared to this person. A wise man, we were talking about the same topic, and he said to me, people think they have it tough. And he said to me, compared to what? And that is so true. If I took you back to South Africa is supposed to be like the country in the southern part of the continent of Africa, the country that's got all the wealth and everything like that. I will take you to areas there where you will walk through what we would call a township, where there are corrugated huts made out of corrugated metal, pieces of plywood, whatever sticks together, okay? And the average size of it is roughly about 8 foot by, some of them 8, some of them a little bit bigger. And in that size there, you'll have easy 8 to 10 people living in that area. There is no toilet. There is no running water. Most of them don't have a source of income. The little kids, I'm talking about little kids, okay? A young girl that's 10, 11, 12 years old, she will walk miles to the only tap in the area, where she will take a 5-gallon bucket and fill that bucket up, put that bucket on her head and walk all the way back. Forget the Tide Pod challenge and the Kiki challenge. I challenge our youth today to literally walk 1 mile just to get to a tap. They wouldn't do it. Parents say to their kids, just take this jug, just a jug, a 1-gallon jug, not a 5-gallon bucket, just a 1-gallon jug, and walk to the neighbor's house and go and fill it up with water. There'd be child abuse. The kid would be crying, throwing a temper tantrum. Compared to what? We've got it so hard. Compared to what? I took kids down to Mexico one year to a church that we built out there, and the church was built on a dump, a reclaimed area that had been filled with garbage. We built a church out there for the people that were there, and the kids had collected clothing, and we took it down there for the kids to give out this clothing, and we took down rice and stuff like that. And there was one little girl, she was little, and she was maybe about that high, and she got a red dress. I saw her through the course of the day about another 3 times or so during the course of that day. And she had that red dress over the back of her shoulder like this and draped like this. And she was walking around and she had it like this. She was dressed in tatters, but she would not put the dress on. All she did was hang on and hug that dress. Probably the nicest thing she's received in years. We have it so tough compared to what? And yet we want to sit and hold on to our negativity and our woe is me, and I've got it so tough. And yet this is, I told you the stats, we pretty much all of us are in the top 1% of the world's wealth. I told you, if you've got 2 vehicles in a family, roof over your head, food on the table, roof over your head, and you've got some sort of monetary, whether it's in your pocket or in a savings account, you're in the top 1% of the world's financial wealthy. But we don't want to do that. We don't want to look at the 99%. I'm talking about billions of people. We don't want to look at that. We want to look at that 0.001 in Hollywood and saying, oh, well, I deserve that. Says who? This is why I'm challenging you with the penny. When God lays something on your heart with regards to, I want to take negativity out of your life, I want to take cussing out of your life, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is, Facebook. It's not so much that he wants to take something away from you, he wants to give you something. Fact is, there's 24 hours in a day. Of that 24 hours, how many of us get to the end of each day and say, oh man, I didn't get to that, I didn't get to that. Our to-do list gets longer. Our days seem to get shorter. So in order for God to put something else into our life, logically, he's got to take something out. So he wants to take the vomit out so he can give you something of worth. It's like he wants to serve you up. He wants to serve you up just like hot, steamy bread, pizza, all the stuff that is non-keto, chocolate, and all these beautiful things that are not on my diet. He wants to serve that up, but in order to serve that up, he's got to say to you, you know what? I don't want you eating that old vomit. And us, human beings, what do? Oh no, Lord, thank you very much for all that. I'll go back to my vomit. And we hang on to the very things that he wants to take out of our lives. And that's what Peter's talking about. All these beautiful things, the freedom that we don't have it because we hang on to it, not because we have to. That have to was gone a long time ago. That have to was beaten on the cross. We hang on to it because that is our choice. You're not enslaved to sin anymore. And something as stupid as negativity, that's a sin. Am I being legalistic? No. I'm just pointing out what you don't have to be enslaved to. Jesus clearly said to us, I've come to give you life and life abundantly. You don't have to be enslaved to any of it. Let's pray.